No problem.
Alright, people, alright. أهلا وسهلا بكم مرحبا. إن الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على رسوله المصطفى وعلى عباده الذين ارتضى ومن بهداهم اهتدى وبآثار أهل المدينة اقتفى وبعد فالسلام الله على القوم. أهلا وسهلا بكم مرحبا. Hoan Leute. Bienvenidos a todos. Bakher Ragle Khushamadid and people Swagatam. Alright, we are back. First of all, I just want to check if the audio's all cool. If there's any audio issues, I'd rather just find out straight away. Especially in these doing it. I'll check with also the Facebook. Mi Facebook gente, what's going down. Alright, people. Just hope you're safe. Yep, I'm all safe. Lillahi alhamd. People just alright. We've got Altaf, Kazi, Obaid, Henna. You're doing it. I take it everybody can hear me all fine. Is that all good? Yep. So, people, we've got an amazing esteemed guest tonight. Sounded like a thinly... Oh, no, right. So, okay. So, first of all, let me bring on the intro pic to our guest. And just by looking at the picture alone, just take a look at this scholar. You'll be like, is this a scholar or am I looking at one of those fashion designer magazines right there? Allahu Akbar. Look at that right there, people. That is a sheikh. Look at the style. Right, that is none other than Shaykh Umair Haseeb, all the way from Chicago, people, Chicago. A Maliki scholar, and we're going to have an awesome conversation tonight. Let me just bring in the Sheikh. Un momento. Alright, so... Alright. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Ahlan wa sahlan. There you are, the man behind the fashion, people. The nose behind the fragrance and the mind behind the textiles, right there. Sheikh Umair, how you doing, man? How you keeping?
I'm doing thank you.
Right.
I hope you are well, man. Honored to be with you, mashallah.
Right. A young Sheikh, just in his late 20s. Young, mid-late 20s, yeah. Not late, 27, I think. 27, 28. 27 from Chicago, doing some great work already, exploring some great ideas, teaching already, people, and we're going to get into this. But first of all, shukran for that. I gotta say, Sheikh, as many people have said who've been following the Facebook page as well, that is a slick photo. So just first of all kudos. I've already said that, but everybody I've shown that to has just been wowed by it. So you're doing it. Was that like a profile picture for like a shadi.com kind of?
I don't do that stuff. I'm not a social media dude. I'm very bad. Terrible at you. That was actually for because obviously, you know, some of us...
was it for singlemuslims.com?
It's single Muslims. You're going to get in trouble, man.
So it was a professional photo, was it?
It was professional. We had to take pictures for one of our
it's like
trades that we do on the side.
Cha. We're calling it a trade. Okay.
We're calling it a trade.
I'm with you. I get it. Alright. He's probably getting a few messages now saying, huh? I didn't know you were on these dating websites. It says, oh my god, it says there's a poor connection with the Skype. How can that possibly be? It's Chi-Town, people. Chi-Town, is there... Let me just un momento. Let me just make sure our guest is absolutely fine. And just bring him. I think that might have been. That might have been. a member of the family saying, I don't realize you're on these dating sites and therefore cut the Wi-Fi.
No, man, do that. The only message I get from mom to clean my room. That's all. That's the only. I just keep getting yelled at. That's the only woman that messages me.
Vah.
You know.
Allahu
So
Akbar.
getting in trouble.
So, people, let me just make sure I can see. Sheikh Umair's sound is low. Let me check. Sheikh Umair?
Should I
Right.
move my head?
Just one moment. If you... let me just check. Guess. Right, okay. I'm resetting the sound for... That should come through fine now. I've reset it on here. If you just... were you not... Don't tell me you didn't hear what we were just saying. Did you guys not hear for what the Shaykh was saying? Or they just never heard your defense to it? So, I was just saying that the Shaykh's photo is that slick. Was it from a dating site? Or was it from like one of those single Muslims? And I think the Shaykh, because he never heard his voice, I'll dub it over in saying, yes, it was. Guys, it's an absolute honour. We've got Shaykh Umair with us at a very young age, doing some great work already. Just to be, yep, I've reset. So somebody's saying, yeah, that's a lot better now. Yep, I've reset it. I refreshed the entire. We did have a glitch, but I've reset the Skype thing. So, Shaykh Umair, just a bit about yourself for our viewers who ain't too familiar with, you know, a bit of your background, where you're from, your studies.
Yeah,
take it away.
There's
the stage is yours.
It's you know, it's very, you know, I'm just honestly, you know, I'm just a young student with certain aspirations, inshallah. So it's been inspired by the likes of our scholars such as yourselves and all of, mashallah, a lot of our ulama, just trying to ride the coattails,
the humility,
man.
people.
Just trying to ride.
I have to pay him afterwards for all these compliments.
I am just riding all you guys' coattails, mashallah. And, you know, just here in Chicago, we have a small space in the south side of Chicago, where we sort of teach and have a small community here, mashallah, a beautiful community, small but beautiful community. And I did some work in prison chaplaincy. And, you know, alhamdulillah, once I returned back to the United States of America, mashallah. So, yeah, I mean, that's just a little bit about me. And we continue to sort of, just attempt to sort of articulate the tradition as best that we can. Obviously, the group that we work with is mainly young people, Muslims who are new Muslims, who have just become Muslim, who have just embraced Islam. Try to give some support and begin with hopefully a holistic teaching, and as well as some people that have been on the front lines for a very long time and want to sort of learn more. So there's also, you know, weekly pulses of like dars and as well as my own personally weekly pulses of study, mashallah, with our teachers. And you know, that's really it. It's sort of it's kind of like an attempt to articulate our tradition in the space and context of where we are right now. And obviously the situation that we're all in, the whole world is in, we're forced to push the boundary on that a little bit, aren't we? Right? So we're forced to start to have the conversation of reconciliation with in our relationship with God and the tradition itself. We're forced. We're being, you know, it's obviously a scary moment, but in of itself, it's a beautiful moment. But sort of that's what I do, inshallah, and that's what I try to do. And you know, there's mentorship, obviously. So the demographics are usually, you know, people that are coming out of incarceration, new Muslims who have just recently embraced Islam. A lot of college students, you know.
And by college, you mean like university, that kind of.
Yeah, what you guys would call university, right? College. I know it's a different system over there.
Yeah.
But you know, we have a lot of people that are from their 18. You know, it's usually 18 to 35. I think it's a solid age of saying
Yeah,
that's like,
that's an amazing. I mean that's a huge range of influence, really.
yeah.
That you've got. But what about your own interest in coming to learning about Islam or wanting to learn about Islam, and then you went off to study? What a bit about that, if you don't mind, sure.
Yeah, I mean, and, in a sort of in a nutshell, not to
Yeah,
make a long
yeah.
story long, is it actually didn't come from a incredibly, my family is a, mashallah, God bless them for them. But they were never engaged in the community that much.
Mm-hmm.
They had just other responsibilities. Obviously, I come from, my parents are like baby boomers.
Mm-hmm.
So, that baby boomer generation that sort of didn't come to, didn't immigrate to the States for da'wah. They immigrated for the States
Of course,
because
of
they wanted
course.
to make some grub, you know what I'm saying? And for all of these things. So, I grew up, you had you sort of had, I sort of grew up in the end of 2000, like like 2000, mid 2000s, 2010. Like that's, I graduated high school in like 2011, which is
Okay.
not long. That's when,
Mm-hmm.
right? So at that moment, you're having people you have like some people in your squad, your family that are, getting into Islam and like trying to practice their tradition, but it's also a very like, um, punch you in the face type of Islam sometimes. And you know what I'm saying? It's like very in your face. Like it's very much like, I'm Muslim. You know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, dude, I wonder what religion you are. Like you'd be like, oh, they're very Muslim. Like it was very Muslim, like a very Muslim, and that wasn't
Like you wear it loud, very
very,
loud.
very, 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 very loudly. And then you had some that were very subtle, and then you had everybody else that was sort of, yeah, man, I'm just doing my thing. You know what I'm saying?
So what
We all
about
float on.
this leap to want to go study abroad? I mean, where did that come from then?
What happened was I had to go to community service. With my mom was
From
like,
the
don't ask the question why, but I had to do community service in high school.
you naughty
And
naughty.
yeah, so I had
Wait,
to
is
go.
community
It
service the
wasn't
same
bad.
community service like here? Like community service
But
here means like the courts mandate you to do some
sort
community
of,
service. Oh, it's the
sort of,
same
but it's
thing, yeah.
not bad. It's not as
Yeah,
bad.
sure,
It's
sure,
not as
sure.
bad. Like
No
I never
problem,
did
no
anything bad.
problem.
I wasn't a
We
bad
don't
kid.
judge. We don't judge people.
I,
Do we judge? We don't judge.
I mean, even if you do, I don't know to tell you. Like, but I was came. It wasn't. It was listen. Like I was. It's a very. You're a very typical American kid. Like you just have one of the things that we forget about is, or we overlook is, we forget that young people are going to have young people experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Period. And that's
Yeah.
just, and when you try to guide, you're trying to control that experience, sometimes it becomes very problematic,
Yeah.
that attempt to control that experience, because that's just or to put somebody in the context and expect them not to be influenced by that context that is around them, right? That's I think is asinine
And it
to
wouldn't,
do that.
that person, should they have been sheltered from an entire organic experience, they wouldn't then, or they wouldn't be, or an indigenous experience, if we use that term, they wouldn't be able to relate as well to the people around them in time to come. Like they wouldn't,
Yeah,
because if you got a child and thought, I'm gonna make sure he doesn't have the, let's say in America, he's not gonna have the normal American
yeah,
experience of growing up.
yeah,
I'm gonna kind of keep him in this little kind of nest almost. Now, when he is, a man or a woman, and they're a scholar or they're an imam, they can't really identify with the regular people, can they? I'm just saying it's a point. But yeah,
yeah, it is. It's not you don't become sort of part of the indispensable fabric of your community, right?
indispensable fabric.
Right. You're not. It's very difficult to do that. It's very difficult to actually become somebody, a person of influence. And as you know, revelation is given to our Habib Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam pre 40 years old, 39, 40 Hijri, whatever, right? But a very long time. And right now, at this moment, you're talking about social capital is being built. The proof of that. I mean, he even asked, if there's an army behind me, would you believe me? Innaka sadiq al-amin, right? Isn't that it? So there's like social capital. I have social capital with you. But if you spend your days not binding any social capital, and some people will be down with you, some people will be like, no, you're crazy. That's just the nature of the world. But the idea is that how can you build that? A lot of times we want to get to Nabuwa before Sidq and Amana. We want to get the tartib of how the sunnah of Allah, right? Of how Allah deals with things. That the tartib or the things that are put in place actually to be part of your community, and that's why monasticism is such a looked down upon thing in our tradition. We're not supposed to be, right?
That's very well said, mashallah.
Right, it's and so as that that experience happens, I go to a local inner city masjid, the Tabligh Jamaat Masjid. That was a masjid that was by Sudanese Shaykh. May Allah,
No, sorry.
Yeah, and we just literally they were just like giving food, and I met sort of my best friend there as well till this day, who's sort of my best friend slash mentor slash teacher slash brother, really, who he's like my big brother named Michael Swice, mashallah. I don't know how
Michael Swice.
Yeah, mashallah. And he's one of the unsung heroes of his whole life has been dedicated to literally taking care of converts. Like his whole life is to take care of new Muslims, which is now extending over to recommitting Muslims, what we call recommitting Muslims, because the experience of the recommitting Muslim, or the one that was born a Muslim, right, and the one that converts to Islam, that experience of those lines are blurred now. We're living in a time where those lines are very blurred, right? A lot of people that are born into Islam have a very similar convert experience, save some other variables. Sure. Right, given the variables. So I meet him, and he starts doing this work. I basically start just hanging out with this dude. I become his little sidekick, so to speak, and just hanging out with them. And I remember sitting in this Tabligh Jamaat, a whole like tiny masjid. I'm telling you, still exists, called Masjid Da'wah. It's on the west side of Chicago. Okay. So anybody that visits Chicago can go visit it. Literally, the names. I mean, it's the name. Like literally, it reeks of Tabligh Jamaat, Masjid Da'wah. Like what do you do? But they just came to me, and the Imam, Allah bless him, Imam Badruddin al-Hafid, he's a Sudanese Imam. He basically said, I wanted to learn like Quran at a very young age, but I also wanted to learn, like I was always interested in, like just wanted to learn. I asked him, what can I learn? And he said, you come learn Quran this time, and this time you learn. You can come after Fajr and learn Quran. So I used to take the train, Blue Line, to the masjid and meet him after Fajr. And I wanted to pay money, but he would never take money. So instead, I would just get Dunkin' Donuts, which is like a donut place for him, which is probably not, in retrospect, probably not a good thing I did. Probably should have gotten some healthier. But I got Dunkin' Donuts.
So you contributed to his diabetes.
So yeah, I contributed literally. I was like, oh, I should have done something. But that was it. We just had breakfast, and he would teach and read Quran, whatever, to the point where I got so close that we would and he was chaplaining he would go do chaplain work at the prison. Okay. And he would literally, the way he said this was weird. I guess this was interesting enough. His go-to book was Bidayat al-Mujtahid. Wow. That was his book. Right?
That's epic book, by the way.
Which is interesting. But also, mind you, it was way over my head as the young kid. I'm like, dude, what? You know what I'm saying? It's like, it was so many words. You know what I'm saying? Like, is there something with less words? More PowerPoint presentation?
It's a coloring in book. Can I color in something?
I have to color the dude doing tayammum. You know what I'm saying? Here to here. Yadayn al-Marafiq for wudu. That's a color in where you have to do wudu from.
Is this the coloring in page for istinja? Is that the rock he does istinja with? You're like, great, I've done istinja with this rock. They're like, no, bro, that was the tayammum rock.
Yeah, but he used to drive me around in his car, and like he used to run errands all day, and I used to read to him, and that was my beginning. So like there would be Shaykh in the car, and I'm just sitting there with my book reading to him, like all day, like, and that was experience. And at that moment, I think it's like 2012 or something like that. I had to I asked my parents if I could go study Arabic for like 2 months, and I'd already studied a little bit of Arabic here and there, but very broken Arabic, just to get by. Probably some, probably get schooled by some Sunday school kid in that, but I was focusing, just wanted to, memorize Quran, to do my prayers properly, and all of these different things, right? Obviously, you go through different ideologues at this time, et cetera, as we all do. But
different groups and
yeah. feel, you know what I'm saying? And which is dope, you know, it's whatever, it's part of your experience. It happens. And it's and you know, you see benefit and sort of try to it's like sort of the cards are there.
I feel that's all the better uh, if it's done at a younger age. You know, when a person is still later to develop. And I mean, I suppose it's good to have gone through that in life anyway, but sometimes if it happens at a later age in life, it's just you're kind of like almost going through your teenage version of Islam at a later age in life. Like if a person, I don't know, in his 40s, 50s now started, you know, going from group to group and discovering Islam. And no, it's still good, but I'm just saying it's something which, if you've been through that, you know, worn the t-shirt, done it at a younger age, you've kind of matured from it, and you have an opportunity to move forward. Just a thought, but yeah.
You know, you're right. And I had eclectic teachers, if that's the word, or mentors at the time. I don't want to say, you know, some of them I actually read with, which are some people that are a lot of them are not like known internationally, which one is Imam Badr, another is a professor at Loyola named Omar Muzaffar. I don't know if you've heard of him before.
Omar Muzaffar, the Omar Muzaffar, the popular guy who with the whole just, you know, the social work kind of thing, or no, not that.
Omar Muzaffar. He's a chaplain.
Oh right, yes, I'm pretty sure. Yes, Omar Muzaffar.
He had a Quran class. You remember that book, Ms. Abdul Halim's Quran?
Yes, I
you know
think
that
so.
one?
Yeah,
it's a blue one. So they had a class that they would do at this place called American Islamic College. Okay, and then I hit him up once, I had nothing, you know, and he was, you know, I said, he said, yeah, come at, like, we'll meet up at a Starbucks after Fajr time or something.
Okay.
And I should drive there and just have coffee and just go through, like, literally the Fatiha itself, the tafsir. This is my first thing. I realized, like, how hard it is, because the first 3 verses of the Fatiha took at least 4 months to get past. Like, I was like, yo,
tafsir or just recitation?
Tafsir in tafsir class, right? And I'm like, oh, it's my first experience with those things. And then I told my mom and dad, I said, I want to go study Arabic. I want to know Arabic, right? And they go, what? And I'm like, oh, can I go study Arabic?
And I was like, your Desi background, isn't it? Indian
background. Yeah. I'm particularly Madrasi, so it's very important.
Madrasi.
I'm South Indian.
You know, the hot vindaloo, the Madrasi. It's known for its chilies, isn't it?
Yeah. What? It's known for a lot of things.
Like generally, like a curry, when it's Madras, it's like quite hot. Usually.
Yeah. Our food is healthier in North Indian. Okay. A lot less butter. It's more water-based food, mashallah. You know, that's why it's very thin.
And the Shaykh speaks Tamil Nadu, isn't on and off, but yeah.
Dude, nobody's impressed by this, by the way.
I'm trying to beef up the guy's CV, for God's sake. Come on, guys. What's wrong with you people?
You know, they're Tamils, you know, we're like the not just figuratively but literally the black sheep of India.
I've seen some of the Tamil movies.
What is it?
Like the one, isn't that where the guy takes out the banana and slices everyone up with it?
Yeah. Listen, you guys, this is a problem. All of you guys make fun of that because you guys live in the horizontal. We live in the cosmological. Everything is possible. There's no gravity. There's no laws of physics. We don't even have Newton's law. We have the law of قال ربكم كن فيكون. Sit your butt down, bro. Bullets can do, bananas can kill people.
So your parents, they said, all right, you want to study Arabic?
They didn't say all right. They said, and they didn't say all right.
What did they say?
They said you better go to medical school. Is what they said, but so they didn't get it. Obviously,
like every other Desi family, you better become a doctor. God damn it.
or it was not out of like being a haters or anything. They were just like, we just want you to have food on the table. You know what I'm saying? We want you to have a career. Like, you need to be taken care of. That was it. It was never out of like a hate. My dad and my mom have never been like haters in that regard. I think they grew into it later. Obviously, retrospectively, they don't understand that world. You know what I'm saying? Like, they never got that world. Like, that's a horrible proposition to make. to people that don't, you know what I'm saying? You want to go to the middle of the desert, or to go study something with what? Like, and there's no something, there's no degree, like there's nothing. There's
When
no,
I said to my parents many years ago, when I was probably about 17 as well, when I thought, okay, I want to study, I watched that Hamza Yusuf video, got quite zealous over it, and he made this video years ago called Ihya Ulumuddin, like revival of the Islamic sciences, where he's in this tent with Sheikh Murabit al-Hajj, and he's doing the whole recording, and I thought, you know what? I'm gonna study properly. I was already studying Arabic a bit, and I thought, you know what? I'm gonna go off, travel. When I told my parents, they hit the roof. I mean, all hell broke loose. They were like, "Have you lost your mind? God damn it!"
yeah, yeah. I mean, which is unexpected, and the first, I think one of the, for anybody that has that conversation, the first thing is just being patient with your folks about this, because they just don't get it. A lot of them, like the Will Smith song, "Parents Just Don't Understand." It's that idea. Is like, obviously they don't comfort that way. And I was fortunate. I never had any parents never spoke to me for a while. Well, I had none of those things like that, mashallah. So they said the only thing that happened was they said, "Where are you going to go?" I said, "Well, the place to go to study Arabic for all of us at that time was Egypt, right? That was a place." Okay, so I was like, Egypt. Everybody wanted to study Arabic. That just happened to be the place. But then the Arab Spring started.
Ah, right. Okay.
Remember that? So they were like, no, because I don't know how good. Because I asked people now, they're like, yeah, it wasn't that bad. But like for us, what we saw in the news was like Tahrir Square, and it was like, oh snap, it was horrible. And then the second option was like, oh, where do I go? And then it was Yemen, because this is like when like it was dope to the Hadramaut thing was like dope. Like this was the rise of this new. Because I'm from Chicago. Like the East never eats soggy. The West Coast guys. They were all to this, like they were into that. Like for Chicagoans, we were not like this idea of like the habaib or the murabitu. Like we were not, we didn't know anything about this. Was all new to us. You know what I'm saying? But I was like, I think
that was more a California thing, was it?
That was that was super California, at least for us, like in our heads. And I think Habib Omar came, and he was like really cool, and I was like, mashallah, I just like met him. He came to our masjid Dawah.
Okay,
and I was like recording for it or something like that. And I was like, this is really interesting. And I was always like super, I was actually really impressed because he was wearing this gangster ring, right? Like he was wearing this dope ring.
Okay, who was that? That's
Habib Omar was wearing this like.
Okay.
And I was like, man.
And was he like, kiss the ring,
God
damn it?
No.
He's like, kiss the ring, God damn it! This is the Godfather, and that's patron to you.
The Don, man. Hamza, and he came in, and he was. I mean, my experience with him, he was really nice to me. I met him a very short period, like a very stint. But alhamdulillah, it was definitely interesting. And so I was like, oh, there's a place called Dar al Mustafa, right? And I was like, I'm just gonna go there. For some reason, my visa didn't work out, right? It just didn't work out, right?
Divine intervention,
something like that, right?
Yeah.
And the next option was I knew somebody who was a mentor of mine for a little bit, I had a relationship with was Usama Cannon.
Usama Cannon, right? Yeah. Very, once again, obviously may Allah make things easy for him now, very ill. But in his time, an incredibly stylish
And Sheikh Ubaidullah Evans had just got back at this time. So he's like, I think he was finishing up exams before, like we just finished, and I'm like met him, and he was like this. He's like the nicest man, one of the nicest.
And he was in Egypt though, wasn't he? Cairo.
He was in Egypt, but he was like I think his last year he was like coming back and forth sometimes.
Right.
So I met him there, and he left back to like finish his finals, right, and to graduate. And Usama's in-laws are Moroccan.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I had some familiarity with that. It's the only familiarity I had. But in my head, I was like, Morocco? Who studies a deen in Morocco? Right? So I was like, Morocco? It's so cool. Oh, it's going to be so lame. Like, it's going to be so
Morocco and lame. Why the hate on Morocco? Yeah.
I didn't know, because I didn't know. I had no idea what was there. I've never met any Moroccans, if I'm honest with you. Like, I didn't,
Moroccans are amazing people. Amazing.
The best people, mashallah. Beautiful people.
Beautiful people, definitely.
Yeah, that's not what I meant, dude. Come on.
You naughty. Shaykh spent several years in Morocco. I'm telling you this. Toba, toba, toba,
I
toba.
did so much that. You know what I'm saying? Alhamdulillah, I met beautiful inwardly.
Of
Um,
course, of course.
see, now that makes it sound worse because now I'm saying they're not beautiful outwardly either. You put me between, you put me between, as I say, Iraq and a hard place. I'm kidding, but
Which
but
sounds worse now. Using these kind of words, this is just like carry on. Yep. So okay,
so
so that
I came
took
to.
you to saying let's go to the Qarawiyin.
So well, I didn't know what the Qarawiyin was, if I'm honest with you. All I knew was I went there, went to supposed to go to Marrakesh, did the Arab exam.
Marrakesh.
Yeah, which was watch this. I was supposed to go to Marrakesh. I took the this was like a class going on for a PhD Arabic program, right?
Okay.
So I failed it. Like I was like I don't know what any of these like they were just like what's they said like it would be like the exam was in Arabic. أشهد لي ممنوع من الصرف. I'm like word. I was like what are you even saying? And
You're like Sadaq Allah Ladin.
I was like I'm like is this a dua book like what? And
You're like if
and
I read it 3 times, will my headache go away?
3 times. Exactly, right? Exactly. Right. Um so it's so they I just went to Fez instead. I never went to Marrakesh. And there was an institution there. I went there for a few months. And long story short, I mean obviously I enrolled, I took an exam, I enrolled into Jami al Qarawiyin at the time. I think that was sort of some of the last years they accepted foreign students without and they're very difficult now for foreign
Because they're
students.
very difficult. They mandate studying French and all this kind of stuff. They used to anyway before it was quite mandatory and I
It
don't know.
was. It
Yeah.
was. I never obviously studied French at all. Excuse me, my phone is ringing. They didn't mandate that for me at all. Mashallah, I never had an issue with that. What they did mandate is like you knew the mutun, so you had to go to the madrasa and study the mutun. You had to have a good chunk of the Quran memorized, a decent chunk, and that's at least for them, right? So you'd have to go to the and then obviously at the middle of all of this in the summers, some of the summers. I would go and live in the Saharan desert. It's like in the Mauritanian Saharan desert. And I went there for a while, which was another beautiful experience. Awesome experience. I mean, that stuff just felt like you felt like you were Indiana Jones at some point, You were like, this was like, oh, this is what it's all about. Because, for a lot, like one of the cool, and I don't mean to, and by no means, and one of the issues that I have with talking about studying overseas is that sometimes it becomes so romanticized that there's sort of this like weird thing that like people, you're going to be, look, if you go
It's
there
like
with
fetishized in a way almost.
yeah, it becomes fetishized and it almost like invalidates the Islam that is taught back home, right? So all of the efforts
By
of
back home, you mean, where do you mean? Oh, back in America, okay.
Or in your case, like UK.
Yeah, so it kind of like does away with indigenous scholarship. Yeah.
So you could some cat could like study for 10 years with the local scholar and his local whatever, and he'll be like, akhi, such and such. But some young punk could go for like a few months, a couple of years here and there, come back and he's like Maulana Shab Sheikhul Islam. Right, because he went like overseas. Like there's this there's like this appeal to it. You know what I'm saying?
There's always. But do you feel that there's always been this kind of thing like what comes from abroad always has this value, unless it's from Wuhan.
Apparently.
But I mean, there's this, because in the time of Ibn Hazm, I remember not from his time, but I remember reading him writing about his time, saying that how scholars seem to diss him, even though he's producing all this masterly kind of work in hadith and everything, and they big up the Eastern scholars. And he says that هنالك يدرى أن للبعد قصة وأن كساد العلم آفته القرب. That really, it's just because I'm close to you, proximity, you feel that there's no value in me. You feel that but yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. It seems to do this. Okay, so yeah. You were saying
There's and you're right. There's always been there's always been this sort of infatuation with all things foreign, right? Yeah. I mean, so that's sort of so that's why when I speak about this, I'm leaving out a lot of some real difficult times that it also occurred. A lot of us, like I went there, like I mean, my parents know this. Everybody that knows me knows that when I went there, I was like 180 pounds, and by the end of the first year, I was 123 pounds, which is I don't know what that is for you
I
guys.
don't know. We generally go in stones and sometimes
Yeah.
kilos, but yeah.
So
So
let's
I've got
say
no idea.
maybe
But I
I think
take it
it's
you
like
went from overweight to underweight. That's
no,
what you're
I
trying
mean
to
I
say.
think that's like 13 stone,
Oh, 13
13
ain't
and
heavy. 13 ain't.
13,
13's
13
just like
or 14.
I must
So
be
it's like
just around 13 stones, maybe just under. I must be about 12 and a half to 13.
so well, how many kilos is that?
Can't remember now. Is that 80 something or 85 or is it something like that? I
Yeah,
don't know.
so
Yeah.
around 10, but imagine going to like 9 stone.
Bloody hell. You
Yeah,
just.
so I was literally like, and I
I'd
didn't
be
feel like,
depressed.
yeah, I didn't feel like I was like skinny or whatever, but like I looked in the mirror, I was like, oh snap, dude, like, boy, you lost weight.
Mm.
Like, but it wasn't because you went from eating like pizza and like just eating a lot of food. You're a college kid for a while ago, and all you did was like eat and work out and play basketball, and that's it. To like eating bread and
Yeah,
olive oil
that's
and
harsh. That kind of student dervish lifestyle. No
student.
shit. You mentioned that look, you don't like to exoticize or some fetishize. Let's say this foreign travel or this kind of studying of knowledge in that way. There's many people who want to study in this day and age. Would you still advise them to travel abroad or no? Or
Oh yeah, I
what
mean,
would you
it,
what would
if,
you
if
say?
if if the experience is safe and verified, I would obviously not to go. Unfortunately, I mean, maybe it was just part of my experience, but I would say like, and I'm glad to had teachers and mentors who advised me first to begin my studies in America and then move on,
Mm-hmm.
because exhaust the resources around you, and because if you're not gonna be serious here, you're not gonna be serious there,
Mm-hmm.
right? So be serious, at least be serious here, and then obviously when you change the environment, obviously when you know, the only thing that was for me, the fact of the matter is I was in an Arabic environment where nobody spoke English, so I was forced to now like be really good at Arabic or try
Yeah.
my best to be really good in Arabic, right? And both conversationally because you're around Arabs all the time, and
Yeah.
I guess the Syrians would tell you that the Moroccans don't really speak Arabic, but like it's a different conversation. But but
I love the Moroccan Arabic, by the way. I love it. But yeah, okay. So there's been some discussions we've had on this show as well about scholarship in the West, scholars, imams, religious kind of guiders in that sense.
yeah.
What is their role in the West, and do we feel that it's become somewhat redundant? I mean, I don't know if do you feel that scholarship in the West now? I mean, is it serving a function, or is it kind of struggling with some
Excuse me.
of
Yeah.
the? Yeah, not a problem. I mean, what would you? I know you are involved in a masjid and you teach online and you do things like this. How do you find this? I mean, still because you're still young as well. Do you feel that ulama are becoming more and more redundant, or not really, or?
Well, I mean, maybe. I mean, so one of the so one of the things is that there is, in usul there is athar al maidan al usul, like there are books like essays like that that's written that you have to study, and thing and that or the other, like in another great reference is the furuq of Imam al Qarafi, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Rahmatullah alayh. And they sort of categorize or prioritize the role of sort of scholarship. Number one, I think, being that al-ihya al-iman wa tahfid al-ruh. Number one is to actually rejuvenate faith and protect somebody's soul,
Mm-hmm.
right? To begin inward, right? So instead of beginning outward first, they start off inward. And then he said the need for like scholars of ijtihad, of legal judgment,
Mm-hmm.
to present fiqh in their time, to fit in the context of their time, in order to facilitate the path to God, at taysir ilallahi ta'ala, to make way their relationship with God is strong in like given all of the difficulties that we face. Like, look, life is already difficult. Okay,
Yeah.
you got bills, you have you people have emotional stresses, they have familial stresses, you get married, you get, some of us go through divorces, some of us go through this, that. The last thing you want is that the religion comes in and is supposed to actually be able to give you an outlet in order to see God in all of that as a centerpiece in your community, as opposed to be something that makes that even more difficult, right? Like, and then I think the third one is actually, they say that it's rulings that that actually reconcile the whole ummah, that try to reconcile the ummah, bring the ummah into the state of reconciliation, right? So what happens is that you study Sharia, you study like how to make wudu, whatever, and you come back to America, and you're asked to talk about, like, especially our younger cats, like you're asked to talk about everything but what you actually studied. So nobody's, you know what I'm saying? You're talking about everything but you actually studied. So nobody actually can teach, like, hey, this is fixed, this is right. And you have what happens is we divorce ourselves from the research of actually studying the tradition, which is this ocean of things. Like 5 years is not enough to study the tradition. You know this way better than I do, right? Because you've probably been doing this when I was playing kickball, right? Like you know that this takes a very long time to master. So it's actually, and one of the ways to master tradition is to teach it, right? Like the Mauritanians say, العلم دون الرجاء كالغسل الأحجار. Like knowledge without actually renewing it is like washing stones, and sometimes even washing stones. Like that's why, like, it's like every year, like as somebody who lives in the United States, you can sort of, every Muslim issue, I promise you can do tanabba of it. I swear to God, you could predict every single one that happens every year. This year, this date, such and such is going to happen. Muslims are going to argue about this. Such and such.
And by tanabba, to kind of like predict in that
sense.
Yeah.
Literally. You know what I'm saying? It's almost like, it's like that.
So what would you say, or like now that you're back, it's only been, it's just maybe 1 or 2 years, you've come back to the States, you've got involved, you're obviously grasping, look, there's a lot going on here as well. What do you feel are some of the biggest challenges that you feel yourself now, having studied, that you think, well, from a faith perspective and the indigenous society you're in, what are some of these, what do you find as some key struggles maybe that either you or people you feel are going through generally that is difficult?
Number one, I think the difficult is, number one is the framing our religion as something that is God-centric as opposed to identity-centric, right? So Islam comes to America, when Islam sort of, there is what you call the irascible identity religion, and this is why irascible identity religion, which is irascible. It's almost like, it's almost like, so an example of this is like any conversation that you have will the I don't know, I don't want to call it scholastic response because I feel like it insults scholarship, but the Muslim normative response, sometimes it's like this reaction, everything is reactive. So like we do things and according to reaction as opposed to calculative, right? Like there is this beautiful hadith that I think about all the time, where the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, al-ajal min ash-shaytan wa ta'anni min Allah, that haste is from the.
That just froze, which is odd. Oh right, you're back. Still... Yep, you're back.
I'm back.
All right.
So I said the hadith was al-ajal min ash-shaytan wa ta'anni min Allah, that haste is from the devil and this deliverance is from God. The difficult part now, or the part, it's sort of, I don't want to say difficult, but a challenge that inshallah I hope that we collectively could fulfill and rise up to, is being deliberate, being holistic, being calculative in our approach.
Do you feel they're distracted in things like sectarianism, or not really in the States? Is that not an issue?
It is. It's obviously not that volatile like it used to be,
So it's improved, you feel, in the States?
It's taken different form. When it used to be like, Sufi, Salafi, to be whatever, like name it. I'm not just to name a few.
That, of course.
Right? And I got love for all of you. You all know that. But there's now it's more of like conservative versus traditionalist versus progressive. versus this versus that. So it's more of a political. It's more of and again, this comes with the idea of identity religion. That my religion is specifically there for me to feel comfortable in my identity. So as opposed to and this is what this idea of I'll give you an example of this is and I don't want to obviously step on toes or anything because
No, don't worry
I'm
about
a
it.
very
Step on them. Don't worry about it.
no,
This is MindTrap.
I'm very I'm very I'm very non-confrontational. If
Allah,
there's
Allah.
anything,
See,
I'm
decent,
incredible.
decent, good people of
I'm
this
not,
ummah.
I'm a non-confrontational dude. Uh, but for the example of now there are conversations between men and women, the
There's
role
a
of men and women,
conversation. Okay,
gender.
yeah, gender
This is the
roles.
conversation,
Okay,
right? Gender
sure,
roles.
sure.
So
That's an
in
interesting one.
in Islam, people sort of have an Islam that is a more that they use Islam in this conversation, or it takes the world community. But one of the beautiful things is the verse that we all quote: "Inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا." Now, if you follow the usuli principle of the Quran, is that tartib is assumed when we deal with things. So before you can do shu'uban wa qaba'ila, nations and tribes, you have to do masculinity and femininity. He didn't say rijal wa nisa. He said, "Inna khalaqnakum dhakar wa untha." We made you masculine and we made you feminine. So you have to know masculinity and you have to know femininity, right? Like the Prophet said, "Habbaba li min dunyakum thalathatan an-nisa wat-tib," right? وَجَعَلْنَا قُرَّةً عَيْنِ الصَّلَاة. What
And
would
Nisa is women.
women,
So
right?
people know.
The first thing was these
The most important thing for men. No. Oh, we've frozen again. Sheikh,
Can you hear me?
there you are. You're back. You're back. It's
I'm
just
back,
the word
back.
women froze the Sheikh. And there you go. I said it again, and he's frozen again. Hello? Can you hear us? I think the internet on this side is absolutely fine. What I'm going to do is just press reset. Maybe that will. Let me just press it. All right, he's back.
I'm good. I'm good. I'm back. I apologize. Mashallah. I think probably it's my connection. But three things were made beloved to me in this world. One of them is women, and and Allah's names, as some of people even like Mulil ibn Ahmed ibn Ajiba or Sidi Ali Jamal, who's Faz, and obviously I'm more inclined towards scholarship because obviously the experience that I had there is that they even name. They say that Allah's Jamali and Jalali names are split into masculine and feminine names. Like the rain is masculine in when it's a storm, but it's feminine when it actually is nurturing, right? And these are the different. Both are needed.
Are you
and
trying to say? Are you suggesting or stating that each individual has a masculine and feminine side to them? Is this what we're?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. But if we don't understand that in itself, we're obviously going to have gender confusion. We're going to have confusion of gender roles. We're going to have confusion of all of these different things. And if we don't understand that, you have a very difficult time reading the tradition, because the tradition has very interesting contextual ideas when it comes to gender. You know what I'm saying? Like you will have a very difficult time getting past. Like in the smallest things will probably get you stuck. You'll be like, oh dang, I'm done. I'm over now. As opposed to looking back and being like, I wonder what femininity is. I wonder what masculinity is. I have to actually dig into these deeper, profound qualities of human existence. The fact, like,
Sorry, carry on. Yeah.
No, please.
No, I was going to say that. There's a lot of confusion about gender roles, gender definitions, masculinity, femininity, like you're saying. But what do you understand from these things, Sheikh?
I mean, how
do you understand these, or trying to understand? When you say these, because there's a lot of discourse about, let's say, gender. People are arguing over it or discussing it. What is your kind of mawqif or position, or what are you kind of? Where do you stand on all of this?
In regards to this, and again, I don't claim I have the answers to any of these things. I could be 100% wrong right now and totally off the wall, but but inshallah, I get the ajr just for trying. But like, there is this piece on, I think it's very important to understand. And one of the, it's one of the scary, or not scary, one of the disappointing things that we see is there's not much of an influence on maxims, on legal maxims, because you get so much from legal maxims, right?
Okay.
And ideas like al-urf al-muhkam, that culture is a ruling factor, right? And what is disdained in our culture is disdained in our tradition, right? Those are legal maxims.
Yeah.
Okay, those are like Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. This is not some like Max book that you find in a Starbucks coffee. This is a Maktab al-Qarawiyin, Maktab al-Azhar. You'll find these maxims. Why do I say is like we have to be able to to reconcile between the role that the tradition attempts to honor gender and not to degrade gender, right? So, is there a hierarchy? Yeah, there's physical hierarchy. Of course there is. Like in terms of general.
Who's at the top of the hierarchy? I'm
right,
sure
is God.
It's God.
God. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, we all forgot.
Everybody,
That's a good one. We were thinking men or women. It's God. God damn it.
It's God.
Yeah.
It's God.
No, that's a good one. That's a good one. I wasn't expecting that.
But that's
But between
how often,
men and women, would you feel there's a hierarchy?
there's, I mean, I would say if you put things in their in certain positions, there is some level of hierarchy sometimes.
Men, women, positions. What are these Freudian slips, Shaykh, at this godforsaken hour?
That is not. It's 7:48 over here. I'm good. It's still early. So it's still early in Chicago.
Okay, so would you feel that men are higher up on this hierarchy? Is that what you'd say?
I would say traditionally that there is. I don't think that's the case. I think النساء شقائق النساء, right?
Yeah.
Men and women,
they're shaqaiq. They are shaqaiq. They are equals. Yeah.
They're partners. And when it comes to certain responsibilities and hukuk, there is, and like some people, obviously there's a difference of opinion in the hadith of Asma bint Yazid, right? When she comes to the Prophet and she complains, "Ana wafidatun min nisa ya Rasulillah," like I'm a representative of the women, and she gives the Prophet some complaints, right? Like he basically says, "Nahnu maqsurat," like you came by my mother and my father, wa anta ya Rasulillah, you're the messenger of Allah, right? You came from ba'ath Allahu lakum rijalu wan nisa, right? I mean, number one, imagine somebody speaking to the messenger of Allah like that. Allah sent you for men and women. قَدْ آمَنَّا بِكُمْ, and we believed in you and we followed you, right? And he says, وَلَكِنْ نَحْنُ مَقْصُورَات. We literally, she says, we're bound by our homes and we're maqsurat. We're given the short end of the stick, right? And she says, like, the men are given these benefits over us. They get to go to and look at what she was complaining about. She said they get to they have salat al-jama'ah, they have the Jum'ah prayer, they have Hajj ba'd al-Hajj, wa ahsan min dhalik al-jihad fi sabilillah. They could go fight in the way of Allah. He says, what do we have? We protect your kids. What rabbain awladukum, we like raise your children. Wahfidna amwalikum, we protect your wealth. Wa buyutukum, and your homes, etc., etc., etc. And they asked, the Prophet turns to the companions, Sahabi, he said, have you ever heard a better question like this? And one of the companions said, yeah, so we didn't know that they were even able to talk like this in the first place. Like, we didn't know they were going to be able to talk like this. We didn't even know they can say things like this. But that's a Meccan hadith, right? If the hadith is, Allah knows best, obviously they're up to it, but it's a Meccan hadith. The Madani hadith, the women, right, in the Prophet basically says, go tell if you support your women and men in any of these different things, all of what they get is given to you, right? He didn't say don't do it. He said just support them on what they're trying to do, etc., 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 right? There are different conversations of all of these things. Now, what happens between that and then where Asma bint Yazid now becomes a muhadditha, right? Or she becomes the fact that she fights in the Battle of Yarmouk. Some of the tabaqat say that she had spears of heads of Roman soldiers. right? Like, what happens between then and then, where now she gets empowered to become a teacher of the tradition, a sheikha of our tradition, right? An imama of our tradition, so to speak. What happens between these two conversations? And so, these are things to think about when we talk about how, this idea that, yeah, there are certain rights, for example, to provide, right? قوامون على النساء. There is this idea of establishing, protecting,
But if
right? The
women are equally, let's say they are providing, they are the provider,
yeah.
would you feel that then revolves in like it does a 180? Is that what we're saying, or not necessarily still, or?
Not, for that, I don't know. I don't know. For
Okay,
this
fair
stuff, it's
enough.
like the nisf al-ilm la adri, right?
Okay.
We have no idea how that cosmologically that works, right? But we do know that inna Allah arhamur rahimin,
Of course.
right? Like Allah does, like by insulting that, you're insulting our mother Khadija.
Of course.
You have to remember that.
Because I have actually said generally in my understanding that the Quran, it addressed, it was in these things, like when it said الرجال قوامون على النساء, it was stating so from a descriptive perspective as opposed to from a prescriptive perspective, because
that's right,
that was the reality on the ground in most parts of the world. Now, should that reality change in certain places, then with it the rulings would kind of change. That's what I kind of said previously. Shaykh, you mentioned.
Somebody. Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, you mentioned just a little while back that look, when people are soul searching for these kind of answers and other things, they're trying to go back to whether it's the maktaba, just right, it's the maktaba. It's just my camera, not the glasses.
That's in my glasses,
right? They're going to the maktaba of the Qarawiyin, or they're looking at Al Azhar. They're trying to find answers in the books of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And you're not going to find things like that. You're saying, well, people have to kind of, which I totally agree with. But on that note, and tying into the discussion, this thing of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, because I know, we've spoken briefly about this previously, but I mean, not too much into it. But this whole thing that, look, Aqidah, and when it's come into play, this whole title, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Do you feel this is a kind of is this a reality? I mean, I know today we say there is this thing called Sunni Muslims, which means by and large the majority Muslims, and it's used to contrast against the Shia.
Yeah.
But is this in essence something that was meaningful? It made sense, or was this a kind of power play? Do you feel that to create a kind of like a club almost? Was it? I mean, was this power dynamics?
That's a brilliant question. That's a really good question. I think that's an awesome conversation. Yeah, I mean, I think now, like, I mean, obviously, I think that, the way I studied it, obviously, or the way I was taught in my schools, people could look back, and obviously I'm very, I incline towards the opinion of my teachers in this regard. And people could say you've just been watering it down a little bit. But one of the teachers said that there was a teacher in our community. Somebody asked him in a majlis, people say we water down the religion, and he said, "Of course you water it down. You don't give babies adult food." He said, "Of course you're watering it down a little bit." So, but when it comes to Ahl Sunnah, I thought there was a brilliance when it comes to Ahl Sunnah, because the Prophet ﷺ said, "الكف الذي في لا إله إلا الله أو الكف الذي يقول لا إله إلا الله لا تخرجه بذنبي لا تكفر به ذنبي ولا تخرجه." It's very interesting how he talks about this, because he says, first of all, basically whoever says La ilaha illallah, don't anathematize them from the religion, but then he says don't excommunicate them. Like, you could have just said La tukaffiruhu, but he says that ولا تخرجوا. Like, don't
kind of ostracize them.
Don't cut them off. Don't ostracize them, right?
Yeah.
Which is brilliant. So you're looking at that when you look at the genius of a lot of our scholars, whether you're from the Ash'ari school or the Maturidi school, is they didn't see themselves in the offense. They saw themselves as the defense. Meaning that, no, these Khawarij are calling us kuffar. Like, the Khawarij are the ones that called Sayyidina Umar, meaning the anathematizers, literally, who called Sayyidina Umar a disbeliever, right? Hasha lillah, and etc. etc. But now there are these people that say that that they believe that everything is isti'ara. It's another group of people.
Yeah, it's a
Everything is
metaphor.
allegorical.
Isti'ara, yeah, allegory
Yeah,
and metaphor.
everything is metaphorical. And you have this other group that says you have to believe that God essentially is mutajassim. He's given in a body, right? The way we look at Zeus, for example, right? The way those conversations, and you can have all these conversations. But one of the things that I think we need to learn from that as a collective, because we're obviously our conversations, let's be honest, are not there in 2020. Like
Yeah.
we're not thinking about the stuff as a collective. And Allah knows best. We don't even know if the normative Muslims were having that conversation at that time. We just, because we're reading from books, we're reading what scholars had in the ivory tower. We don't know what's happening within the normative. There's a whole different
No, of
conversation
course,
happening
of
on the
course.
ground,
Of
right?
course. I was always curious because I felt that, obviously, I mean, we're brought up, we are not only born into Sunni Islam, we grow up as Sunnis, and we are, whatever that is understood to mean.
Yeah.
But generally, while studying things like this, I mean, not during my madrasa years, but more so in recent years now, whilst looking at all of this and the kind of questions I've had going on, I felt that, this is quite interesting because where does this actually, like, at what point do Muslims, scholars, start to
Yeah.
refer to themselves as we are Ahl Sunnah?
That's yeah.
So
Yeah.
this seems to emerge really only after the issue with Imam Ahmad,
After, yeah.
right?
Bismillah.
So Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and the whole mihna of the Quran kind of thing. After that,
Mm-hmm.
but before that, um, whether it was Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, all these great Imams, even Imam Shafi'i, really, during the first 200 years of Islam almost, no,
Yeah.
this doesn't really appear, even though all those sects have appeared. The Shia have
Have
appeared,
appeared, yeah.
the Mu'tazila have appeared, the Khawarij have appeared, all of these sects are in existence, yet this term hasn't really come about called Ahl
That's right.
Sunnah. And I felt
That's right.
that it, even though initially it may have begun as with, however it did, just as a natural reaction eventually, but along the way, there were a lot of power dynamics, the ability to exclude now. Because the question was, you see, I could say you are a Khawarij because you believe this, this, this.
Mm.
So I could say you are a Shia because you favor Ali and you do this, this, this. I could say you follow this person and therefore you are Mu'tazili, and from the early Mu'tazila, let's say, you believe in certain things like the Manzila Bain al Manzilatain. But how else can I? But once I have a defined code of what you must believe in to be part of the club. You see, prior to that, that didn't exist. So in Imam Malik's
That's
time,
right.
there was no subscription policy. Like, so long as you didn't call other people kafir and say that Abu Bakr and Umar were deviant and
Yeah.
so on, you
Yeah.
were still,
Yeah.
we were all
We were
mainstream
so
Muslims. So what are your
well. It's
thoughts
like
on that? Yeah.
it's like when they asked Sayyidina Umar about the Khawarij, they said هل هم كفار, and he said كيف يكفر, he said كيف يكفر بالله يعني كلكم ضد الكفر. Their whole piece is against kufr. That's their whole spiel, right? Right? How can they be kuffar? He said, then are they hypocrites? He said, how are they hypocrites? Well, فقال الله تعالى في كتابه, Allah says that بعد المنافقون يذكر الله قليلا فإنهم يذكر الله طول النهار. They remember Allah all day, and Allah says that the munafiqun don't remember. He said, who are they? He said, إنهم إخواننا الذين فرجونا وظلمونا. There are brothers in
Yeah.
this religion who are oppressed us and transgressed us. And that's the define. And look, our whole lives are made by defining moments.
Yeah.
In terms of choices, that's our life. That's our life. We have to be honest, like, and come to this realization that everything, even our sciences, are muwaqqat. They're temporal.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, this, right, I just saw this there actually. This is a book I'm actually going through right now. It's called The Formation of Sorry, let me just put it up there. It's called The Formation of Hanbalism, Piety into Power.
Interesting.
And it actually discusses a lot of these kind of things as well, about like it's interesting at what point something becomes instrumentalized for
Mhm.
power dynamics. And
So, but I think that's where the issue is, as opposed to creating a science or a group like Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah that says how can we preserve what we believe to be, a normative Islam without like anathematizing people or excommunicating them and not calling them kuffar. We'll say Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We'll say that. So listen, you do what you do, but we're Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. You could critique that, but the difference between, I think there was a sincerity there, as opposed to sometimes now it's become weaponized, right? It's become weaponized, and this is a really big issue, to believe that you are entitled to this tradition, right? We don't have a monopoly over this thing.
yeah,
And if we're and the idea of I'll give you an example, if I may. One of the big issues is people that have they adhere to different sexual orientations. And I remember somebody, even in our community, a very, mashallah, an elderly imam who has been doing this work for years. Somebody asked him about a masjid that had did something that had to do with people that um, adhere to a different sexual orientation. And he
just
said just he
homosexuals.
said,
Yeah.
yeah, homosexuals, and he said, just he just let them do what they're doing. It's all good. Like, we're just, you could do what you want. We're just gonna do what we do over here. And they were just like, you're not gonna make a statement. You're not gonna say this. And it was very interesting of how upset people got at him. And he's like, he didn't do anything, dude. Like, you're not.
Hello. I think Chicago is having an internet.
Oh
Oh,
yeah,
you're
you can
back.
hear
You're
me.
back. You're
You can hear me.
back.
There we go.
All
There we go. Yeah.
right.
But isn't it indicative of that, when they asked Imam Malik of Tilq al-Qariya yadhiru, there is a village that practices incest, right? And then what does Imam Malik say? He says, "Itrakhum." He's like, leave them. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ قَرَّ لَكُمْ أَطْيَبَ مِنْ ذَلِكَ. Allah has preferred for them whatever you want to translate that,
Yeah,
something
yeah.
purer than that, or something.
No,
But he's just like, dude, let
I
it.
have actually quoted that in reference to. I have a whole kind of like a detailed segment on homosexuality and Islam, a diverse history. And I do go through. I mentioned very clearly that, look, yes, within Islam, the overwhelming dominant kind of narrative is one like other biblical religions in which homosexuality is prohibited and so on. Even within that, I mentioned that, however, when it's from other communities, we don't get involved. Like Imam Malik said that you don't, like when it was incest, he said that la na'ridu lahum. We don't kind of like, it's their business. If that's what they understand as a way of life, we leave it. And I did mention that, however, there were certain scholars from like the time of Imam Ahmad, like Qadi Yahya ibn Aktham, and there were a few others as well, who believed homosexuality was permissible in Islam. And they used the Quran to justify it, and they used verses like زُيِّنَ للنس what is it زُيِّنَ للرجال حب الشهوات من النساء.
وَأَطْوَلَ النِّسَاءِ وَالْبَنِينَ. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
وَالْبَنِينَ.
زُيِّنَ لكم حب الشهوات من النساء
وَأَطْوَلَ النِّسَاءِ
والبنين.
وَالْبَنِينَ.
And
Yeah.
he said were here was about الشهوات شهوات البنين. And they used other verses as well, and they kind of like
Yeah.
justify it, like al malu wal banun zinatul hayati dunya and stuff. And many people understood it as sons, like your children.
Yeah.
But people like Qadi Yahya ibn Aktham and others said that no, this meant generally from a sexual orientation.
Interesting.
But my point was that even though that was a minority of, and one could argue, an extreme minority, but the point is that Islam did have in its tradition a sense of diversity. And I went through the history of all the caliphs who were openly homosexual, beginning with Walid from the Umayyads and right down to people like Ma'mun and Amin, who were like openly homosexual. There was nothing kind of hidden about it. And right through other people as well, not just them. But why people tend to get very emotionally reactive. We've discussed this on the show previously as well with some other guests. But you find that I know in the UK or in these countries where people are still a lot more conservative, maybe if I use that term from a religious perspective. But I would have thought in America, people are somewhat, I don't know if once again using these words like progressive, I would have thought. But you feel that this is still such a big big deal and a huge?
I think I don't think it's a big deal. I think sometimes we make it
Okay.
a big deal because I don't think anybody's asking for a validation in this regard. Number one, and one of the problems I think is that the Muslim community sometimes we attempt to look for validation from those who have no interest in validating us, right? We seek some weird validation. The biggest threat to our tradition, like let me be honest with you, I barely know any Muslims that adhere to that. I don't know any Muslims. I don't think I
That
know.
are what? Sorry.
That there's a very small percentage of Muslims that adhere to other than a heterosexual relationship,
Oh, being
right?
gay.
There's like being gay.
I
like,
think
you know,
I think huge parts of the Muslim world would probably disagree with that.
that's the difference. I'm in America, right?
I
There's a
think
very people.
the stats on search for gay porn would
I'd have to
reveal
look
that
that up.
like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and
And and you know, there could be a lot of different explanations for that. But in terms of this, I was like, that's not the the that's not right now the biggest. You could say what happened in the difference between now and the past, because I also have a little bit issue of romanticizing the past without understanding what actually occurred in the past.
yeah,
Because
there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that, isn't there?
there's a lot to say we live in bad times, right? We live in horrible times. It's like, yeah, dude, you also didn't experience the Mongols, like Ibn Taymiyyah experienced. Like, what do you think?
Once again, the Shaykh slightly frozen, but I'm sure he'll.
I'm sorry.
You're
Could you hear me
back.
now?
You're back. Allah,
Yeah.
Allah.
Like, if if people,
Yeah.
people blame Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullah about this, it's like, what type of fatwas for some of his harsh judgments? But yeah, but if you saw blood on the street up to your ankles and young people getting butchered and skinned alive, what type of fatwa would you write?
You see, this
Right? It would be informed by.
there's
Yeah.
that Sheikh. There's the what you're saying about the kind of I don't know, barbaric nature they saw to reality. There's that side, undeniable. But what's also interesting, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is I feel that the scholars in the past were living quite harmoniously, but kind of dichotomous lives in a way that they were. You see that they had. So, for example, let's say this is a fiqh book. This ain't, but I've probably got one here somewhere. Now, they were writing fiqh books, but the fiqh books were detached from the way they saw and perceived living Islam on the ground. Now, so for example, if we go, like, let's take the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire, approximately about 700 years it lasted. Now, they have actually preserved, there's a huge, a lot of the judicial cases have been preserved, like the judicial writs and case studies that were written by the judge's judgment, like, so and so came today and and they're arguing over this land and this is my judgment, or such and such stole and such did this, and their judicial cases do not reflect the books that they would write in fiqh. But yet this is the same judge authorized, administering these codes. Now, one could say that, well, okay, because we know, for example, stoning, cutting off the hands, things like this seldom happened. They had things like financial penalties. They had things like there was corporal punishment, like they would slap. So, for example, in Egypt during the Mamluks and this era, there was a certain punishment that the judges would do, which was like a very heavy slapping. Sometimes they would do, and sometimes, depending on the regime, it may have changed. The kind of punishment people would do. But Ibn Khaldun is a scholar that would often still kind of slap he would give this kind of punishment to the people he felt needed to be punished. Now, one could say, well, okay, maybe the state might get involved if you were taking life out of and it was against their instructions. But other corporal punishments, like, I don't think the state would have really cared, the empire, if you were slapping them or hitting them with a stick or lashing them. Like, if you said, "Can you get a whip, please? I'm going to lash him." I don't think the Ottomans or the the Mamluks or the Ayyubids or the Ikhshidiyin or any of them would have really cared. So the point, but what we find is they themselves were not like the lives they were living and they had control over it in practicing is very different to what they wrote in the fiqh books. Now today
Interesting.
we read their fiqh books and we think, oh right, this guy's written this, so therefore he must have firmly believed this to be the thing. Otherwise, why would he write it? It makes no sense to me. Now, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you feel that there was this? I'm not saying a disconnect, and I don't think that they felt they were hypocrites when they were doing that, but they just lived in a kind of, I don't know, like this kind of dissonance. But it
The
was
ivory tower,
harmonious.
so to speak. Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely again, the weaponization of scholarship is very problematic in terms of the way we look at, like, everything is very like that. There is that beautiful critique of one of the students of Imam was, I think, either it was Ibn Qayyim or somebody else, who wrote a critique of Imam al-Ghazali, right? And he writes an entire critique and tries to basically take out every one of his arguments. And in the end, he says, وَلَا يَزَالُ Abu Hamid al-Ghazali حُجَّةَ al-Islam. In all of this, he's still the proof of Islam. So he begins with the critique, but he ends with saying that, no, this, he's still, like, he tips his hat out. You know what I'm saying? Like, he you know what I'm saying? He recognizes that this is also, I'm criticizing him, but he's Imam Ghazali. You know, like, with criticizing a lot of what that he has to say. And that idea of, like, there's a, you know, and this is the difference between, and this is why we have the science, we call the science of debate in Islam al-ilm al-munadara, right? We don't call it mujadala, which is impermissible in some situations, like in Hajj, Bab al-Hajj, you can't even do just.
I do apologize for the poor network today. You're back.
Sorry.
You're back.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
so mujadala.
Sorry. Yeah, mujadala, which is for Bab al-Hajj, you realize how, when you read Bab al-Hajj, you understand it's a very bad thing, right? You're not supposed to do it. Or the beautiful, multiple hadith on saying that whomsoever one of you is arguing in their right and they wrong and they leave the argument, Allah builds for them a house in paradise. If they're right, to paraphrase, Allah, and if Allah builds for them a house in the garden of paradise, meaning that, like, stop arguing one another, right? Stop arguing with one another. Now, we don't have argumentation or munaqasha, right? Meaning the attempt of me putting a naqsh in your body, like literally the attempt of me basically giving you my conclusion and not hearing what you have to say, as opposed to munadara being that I'm hearing you and you're hearing me. Like, I see you and you see me. I completely see where you're coming from, and I could totally see how you got to that conclusion, right?
In that way, do you feel that scholars in the past were in some ways more open-minded? Is that what you're?
I think they had more. You know, that framework is. I don't want to do that, but I will say they had more ihtisham, more decorum.
Okay,
I mean, there was
well said.
Look, I mean, but there's also more prestige back then with scholarship than there is, you know.
Do you feel the scholars back then, and even to some extension today, definitely, but especially back then, were a social class in and of themselves? Like, and the way you have an aristocracy, although an aristocracy is based on wealth, but there's an element of power that is also there.
Yeah.
Do you feel the scholars were a class in society, and they perceive themselves as a class?
You know, there's probably, like, anecdotal instances of people looking. I mean, look, what is Talbis al-Iblis of Imam Jawzi, Ibn Jawzi, was the entire thing was talking about scholars thinking to themselves. Like, he just goes after scholars and be like, you guys think you're all that in a bag of chips, right?
Yeah.
Like, you guys need to come back to earth. You're calling people to this and that. He says you're you know, he talks about the ulama sultani, the ones of the sultanship. They just say whatever the sultan says. The appeasers, the people that I mean, wasn't that the whole? Imam Ghazali talks about the mugharrik. He calls them mugharrikun, the deluded ones. In one of them, he said the deluded scholars. They're deluded in the way they walk.
Because you have, like, I know some. You're Maliki.
What I'm saying is that probably happened. What I'm saying
I definitely believe it was a reality. I mean, you have, like, I was just saying that you're Maliki now. Obviously, as am I and many viewers, but the Maliki madhab doesn't have, like, on some, let's say, social aspects, like it will speak about in nikah, things like what makes one in society an equal. Now, they will generally, the Malikiya they seem to just say religion and faith, and they kind of have almost a very pious, pious outlook, like Imam Malik kind of saw that. But the Hanafi madhab, for example, and the Shafi'i madhab to some extent as well, they recognize social status. So they'll
Yes.
say,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the Hanafis are quite, some of them more than others, really go at it in saying, like, such and such is that. So, for example, Arabs are higher status than non Arabs according to Hanafi fiqh. And they will say, and from the Arabs, Quraysh are higher than regular Arabs. And amongst, they say non Arabs are similar, but then they do recognize social
Yeah.
statuses within them. And an interesting thing, they will state that they say that you're not
That's
an
interesting.
equal fit for marriage if you are not from. So, an Arab and a non Arab, even if the Arab, so let's say somebody claims to be Sayyid from the family of the Prophet, but they're not, but they are ethnically brought up in non Arab countries. So, they are, let's say, um, Pakistani, or they are Indian, or they are brought up in these other countries. Now, what they will state is that because this person claims to be of a Sayyid Nasab, they are an Arab, a Hashimi, therefore they are not an equal fit with a non Hashimi. Um, but
Yeah.
the interesting point I was going to say in all of this is that they will state that unless a person is a scholar, they are then exempt from this. Like, the scholars are equal as like an upper class. They are, they can't get trumped. Like, they are the elite. It's like an ace card. The scholars. Obviously, questionably, the scholars themselves are the ones who are writing these books as well. I mean, there's a self-interest thing there, but
Yeah.
it's interesting that they saw that the scholar class, like if you were from a low class, like let's say you were a freed slave or you were something like this, or and you don't fit as a marriage, but if you're a scholar, then you do fit any class. So it's interesting. I just thought,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
kind of
It
power
is.
dynamics that.
It's. It's. I mean, most of the world saw them as warathat al-anbiya, like they were the warithin, right? The
Hmm,
ones that held. Now, obviously, the prerequisite for scholarship was a lot higher back then. Let's be honest. It's also watered down. You know what I'm saying, compared to how it was back then. But I also think that it's sort of uh, it doesn't speak to us anymore because we don't have that. Like our the idea is that most people are not looking at they're not really looking up to their scholars as they did back then. Like people sometimes actually cared at some level about what a madhab had to say, what a ruling was. They cared to go get a ruling from a qadi or from a and mashallah our qadis were like, for example, the way we treated the non-Muslim in Andalusia was unbelievably beautiful, right?
yeah,
I mean, you couldn't even it was impermissible to call them a non-Muslim. He could take you to court,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And right, there were things like that. So there was an affinity towards the decorum, but I think that you see a revival, and again, I think that we're just going through a stage of we're seeing a rise in people that are interested, and you hope that people are interested in the right reason to actually do scholarship. Now the difference between scholars, because somebody you could argue that most of our collective generation, meaning the last three generations, are more rawi than ulama. Like
Yeah,
you have more narrators than you actually
yeah.
have scholars. By definition, a scholar
That's an
is one that
interesting
produces.
perspective. Yeah,
Yeah, because by definition, scholarship produces work, right?
yeah.
That produces work. We have like, how do we not like have a published matan of fiqh for Americans
I
that
know.
could speak to the
I
Americans? Like,
mean,
how do we not have one?
I sat with Sheikh Ahmed Tahar Rayyan, one of the leading Maliki scholars. I mean, um, and he was telling me that look, he'd just come back from a like as in the last few weeks prior to our meeting. This is a good few years back. He'd come back from the Middle East somewhere. I can't remember where it was at the time. Maybe Bahrain, or there was some. He'd been somewhere where there was a conference, a select conference, private conference for key leading Maliki dons of the world. Yeah, I was obviously thinking, well, how come I wasn't invited? Duh. And not right, but no. What he was actually telling me was that he was there. There was people like Sheikh Rugi was there. He was telling me Sheikh Rugi was there,
Okay, yeah.
and a few other Abdullah bin Bayya and a few others. Now, I think Abdullah bin Bayy mentioned, but there were quite a few others. Sheikh Naji, and a few others. Now, the point was that they were working on a project which was meant to be huge. Now, so when I asked him about the project, and it was, they had a particular text which was, I think he told me, because it's still not, I don't think it's been published still, and it's been a good few years. I think it was the Sharh al-Saghir, but it was one of these, I think it was one of Dardir's works, I believe.
Imam Dardir's, yeah.
Imam Dardir's. But the point was they were going through the whole work. It was already elaborate, the kind of commentary, and they were providing evidences, and it was going to turn into this voluminous work that you have all the evidences, the hadithi evidences and everything, and the hadith and the takhrij on the hadith and everything for this entire work of the Maliki madhab. Now, I was just thinking, look, as great as that is, sure, that's good. I mean, we have got other works already to do with the evidences for the madhab. Don't you think we would need a contemporary, a fiqh in sync with our day and age?
Yeah.
So when you say like Kitabul Miyah, the books of water, speak about water today in the taps when it comes mixed with different chemicals. What are we looking at today? Speaking a chapter on mortgages, a chapter on like things which are relevant to this day and age.
That's true. And I wish there was more of the, there are attempts right now that are, there's a sheikh in Chicago named Sheikh Amin Khalwadia. He's a Hanafi, mashallah, jurist and one of
Is
the
he
OG
from
sheikhs.
Madrasa Qasim or something?
Qasim. Yeah,
Yes, I heard, many years back, I heard Mufti Kamani speak about him, I believe.
Yeah, mashallah, yeah, Hafidullah Ta'ala. He's doing it's really interesting to read some of the stuff. He's talking about bioethics, Islam and bioethics, which I think is you could talk about how much could be produced in just that topic, in terms of like how Islam looks at bioethics or Islamic finances and how we deal with finances today. A lot of us, I think he was one of the people that sort of stood up and was like, young kids, like we need to rethink the way we think about college loans, because we need our kids to get educated, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like we need our kids to go to school. Like this is kind of nuts, because one of the assumptions that a lot of we make is that the school, like there's even, like, I'll give you an example, the ruling on libasa, like you have to have a mukhayyat tayyib musalih. Your mukhayyat has to be somebody who goes to the masjid. Number one, okay.
Mukhayyat is a tailor, basically, to have your clothes.
Sorry. Now you be honest with me. If I present that today, I'm clearly speaking to a very elite class of people in the socioeconomic ladder, because most people cannot afford a tailor. Most people cannot afford these type of luxuries. It's very luxurious.
But the day and age has changed. I mean, today,
that's what I'm saying.
We just buy clothes from a shop. We don't need tailors.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying, right? Is that, like, because our fiqh books relate that to piety, who you buy your things from. And if you go to traditional places, if you go to Fez and things like that, you'll see a butcher, like 3 butcher shops, but like 2 will be like not many people go there. But you'll see 1 or the other 2, just a line of people, but they're all butcher shops because people know who that person is. He's fair. He deals with qist. He's very equitable in his prices. He doesn't really cheat you. All these conditions adds up. People go to him.
But that's like very good character, though, isn't it? That's
exactly. It's connected, right? But for us, we don't have. We have the we deal with mass production, right? We deal with the idea that we go to a wholesaler, company that buys from a wholesaler, and he buy things. Now, for us, a lot of those things are we don't even deal with it. We can't. It's very difficult, and not only America.
But looking at, let's say, if we did look at our world today, in the moment, and the religion too, that would lead to a certain amount of, obviously, revisiting, tajdeed, renovating, or however,
yes.
I know that's a better term, like you were saying, to renovate something, but it involves critiquing our tradition.
It does.
I mean, would you be in favor of our critiquing our tradition? What are your thoughts? Because there's a huge pushback against this critiquing our tradition.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean,
look,
I've had huge
like
slack for this.
Imam Malik said, whoever doesn't have logic, the knowledge of yani wala wathiq bi ilmihi. It's a sign that you don't have any confidence in your knowledge. You should be ready to just we should be confident. Listen, like we believe this tradition to be the truth.
Yeah.
Okay, and we need to be very clear, number one, of what's are the thawabit and what the mutaghayirat. We haven't established this right now when we have these conversations. What are the thawabit, the absolute? And they describe this as rasikhun mustaqar, right? Al-Qarafi and others say that this is things that are firmly rooted, that it's a non-negotiable. These are non-negotiables. We have non-negotiables. And he said, now what are the negotiables?
Yeah.
What are the
The
mutaghayirat? What are
mutaghayyir.
the
And
negotiables?
this is something, and I know you're a fan as well of this is something Imam Shatibi is huge on. His whole right throughout his
Yeah, the
muwafaqat, the
muwafaqat.
whole
Yeah,
the thawabit and the mutaghayyirat.
that's the whole piece, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That's literally so much of it, and it needs to be really spoken about in a way that articulates how we can facilitate this religion to people. A very good example is, look, in America, in our tradition we look at the deen of a woman before you get married, or the of the man, vice versa. But I think it's your religion,
Do
and
people
they
actually
said
do that?
for your nasb. People, I mean, actually,
Do you feel that
I'm
people
not a
actually
public
look at? I mean,
expert.
unless you mean by religion, that is he a Muslim? Is she a Muslim? But do they actually look
Okay,
at?
people look at, yeah, I mean, people are involved in different expressions of the religiosity. Some people are involved in different places, but some people just fall in love and get married, and it's that's just how it works. But
Fuck!
even looking
Look
at
at
something, you,
look at a romantic out. Some people just fall in love and get fuck.
you know, right?
Sheikh, you can
And
clearly tell the Sheikh is still young.
uh, like, you
uh,
know, and then there's Nesp, right? There's that's a big one. Is Nesp? But what family did it come from? Well, like if it come from an honorable like lineage, well, in America we're just creating our lineage. We don't really have lineage here, right? We're a few generations out. We have a few families here, but we don't really have that. If you're a convert, it's difficult to talk about the conversation of lineage. In fact, it's very sensitive. It's insensitive for me to talk about lineage in front of a new Muslim sometimes, or somebody that doesn't necessarily come from a lineage that they know, or a lineage that they really want to talk about, et cetera, et cetera. Or
yeah.
there's a multifaceted. So what is we don't have a protocol. And I have a friend, Allah bless him, he's actually working. He's one of his projects is now looking at like how Muslims deal with the protocol of marriage, right? How
Okay.
are collectively deal with this? Like, what is our usul? What are our principles? And how do we deal with two people? One of the things is like, I mean, I know other people have this opinion, and one of the things that we have in our mosque, and Miskeen, I'm just a khadim, but the scholars that
Allah, the
I find
humility.
is
Allah.
that is that one of their protocols that I follow is that they don't let me do a nikah ceremony, right? The kitab
They don't
before
let
it's
you.
legal. No, unless it's legally marriage with the
Ah, right.
legal document.
Are you
Because
are you in line with that? Do you agree with that sentiment?
I agree with it experientially, because it's very difficult to keep, because we've had weird cases, bro,
Yeah.
of this stuff,
Because
right?
I
And
personally kind of believe that I don't believe in unifying the two. I mean, I feel there's
church
no
and state,
harm
yeah,
if people
church and
want
state,
to,
yeah, yeah,
but I
yeah,
feel that religious ceremonies should be religious ceremonies and
yeah.
statutory ones should be statutory. And I feel
That's
that
true.
if
And I think that's the
yeah,
majority opinion, though. I think that's the majority opinion. I think about the one that we follow is minority, because and look, we could be just trial and error, by the way, because what we just saw is like there was people that were taking advantage of this to a crazy extent, right? Like there was very, very people that were just, we didn't know where their other families were. Sometimes some people got married, like they got married and nobody knew their visa situation, or they got the visa marriage stuff, whatever.
but I mean,
You could never.
isn't a huge part of this down to the actual person getting married? Like, isn't
In
it
the end
their
of the
kind
day,
of response? Like, if it's like if I went and bought something, let's just say, obviously not that marriage is purchasing, but
yeah,
let's say I bought this book and it turns out, well, like like obviously
I'm
there are
paying the
rights,
dowry.
but there are rights, but obviously you would contact the seller. But if somebody just came up to me and said, look, hey, do
Yeah,
you want to buy this phone? And I said, well, I don't know, like let me take a look at it, and I assess the situation.
yeah,
When you come across somebody
yeah,
and you think, well, I like this person, you ask questions and you meet, and but I suppose you can always deceive people if you really want to deceive them. I suppose if you're really good at it, you can. I get that argument as well, but I do feel
yeah.
there's a sense of responsibility on.
You're right. You're right. In the end of the day, it's an individual institution at some point, right? But the way the community works for in sort of in the way sort of it works in our specific community is that there is a sense of there's always been a historic communal responsibility, right? Because we are sort of riding the coattails of people like Imam Warthaddin Muhammad's community that brought people into normative Islam, and in their communities there was a sense of like um, of communal responsibility, right? Like the village, so to speak, that raises, and I could even see that the critique against the way we do it, and I think it makes that critique, it makes a lot of sense, and again, and again, that is the minority opinion, and I think what you're saying is the majority, right? People are just like, listen, bro, if you got married, you got married, right? You had to know what you were getting into.
You know, you mentioned there about Imam Warith, his community, and other early communities, and some of them in some ways may have been radical. But I know you've mentioned previously that, but there was a kind of dignity you feel to that early kind of radical approach. I mean, what I mean on that, what are your just to explain to people? I mean, how do you see the contrast? Because we see early communities sometimes that were also quite stiff and firm and dogmatic on things. It's not like they were necessarily so open-minded, but there was a different, but they had a different veneer to them almost, didn't they? Do you?
Yeah. There was. I mean, it's something to look up to if you look at people that were just so strong in their principles, and it's people that held values that were so dear to them, and all these different things. But you can't be naive when talking about it either. It sort of watered these things down to the point where like nothing. It was a lot of those communities are non-existent now, right? For a reason. Like we don't know what happened to them. They're sort of in the decline. They're not on the incline. But I think and obviously when I look at things historically, I'm seeing like what is the virtue in this, and how can we apply the virtue and now do this better than they did it, right? Or how could we train how could we train our collective
like
community
take the lessons
to
and
enhance?
like when we were growing up, there was this whole and when I say growing up, not growing up, but I suppose when I got interested in the deen and started taking it seriously and went off to study and things like this, there were in the West, there were, I suppose, there weren't as many scholars, but there were people like let's say Shaykh Hamza Yusuf, who till today I would say is like especially in America and by extension in the English speaking world, maybe seen as a kind of leadership face of Islam amongst the leadership. Do you feel that this understanding has this? I've been told sometimes that that's only like seen by people like me, my age, maybe people who've now, like, let's say in their late 30s into their 40s, things like that. The younger generation don't see it that way. I mean, what do you feel? Do you feel that they still see this kind of leadership and like a kind of almost, I don't mean whether it has to be with power or not, I'm not speaking about the power conversation right now, but do they see this hierarchical backdrop of Islam in America? Is there this kind of respect of seniority to people or no?
In the younger generation?
Yeah, and you're still young yourself, actually. I mean, and people that you're engaging with, I guess, as well, that may be younger than you. I mean, you're 27.
I'll say this much. I mean, and this is the most I'll say. Dr. Sherman Jackson, may Allah protect him.
Yeah.
he said one of the things that he said was the greatest threat excuse me the greatest threat to religion is not persecution. It's apathy born of irrelevance.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
So he said that they may be, one of the things that we have to understand is that there is not a sense of leaving the tradition as much as there is a sense of apathy towards it. It doesn't speak to me, right? Sometimes people believe this does not speak to me.
Is that also relating to a sense of indifference or a sense of like they can't relate simply to it, or they become indifferent to it?
I think they feel like they haven't been invested in. They haven't been. It's been more of a divest situation, right? And they, that's usually been the case for a lot of younger people. That the age is the age of social media. This is the age of of the idea that, right, like there, I mean, we have the categories of people. the people that have the 30-minute a week, they need some inspiration, and we have the talk for them. Some beautiful words of inspiration, upliftment, right? Of just positivity, inshallah. And then you have the next group of people that are really trying to, I want to learn how to read the Quran. Alif, ba, ta, ta, jim, ha, qa, kataba, darasa, right? They're literally sitting there doing this stuff in the whiteboard in the wall. And then there is like, all right, and then there's like the prayer workshop people, like, we're going to learn how to pray, right? And then you have students that are just like, no, I want to go through, I want to go through Mukhtasar al-Akhdari ibn Ashr and the Risala of Imam Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani. I want to go through that. I want to go through the Manch. I want to learn, right? Obviously, I'm speaking as a Malkite.
All right, like, Maliki, high five. All right, look at that, people. We managed to high five across the continent right there.
Yeah, you know the story of the Sufis about Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani, who put the lawh up, and Mullah Abdul Salam and she's grabbed it from the other side because of Cosmos. This is our version of that.
This is our version. There it is right there. All right, high five.
We've bended time and space.
That's it, people. The wormhole right there. But okay, yep, you're saying so there's people who definitely commit more.
They're these that's true. They're now like it's naive to take very big conversations and bring it down to people and expect them to be down with it, right? Like there's a there was always the awam and the khas. Like there's always been the people who are in regards to scholarship, right? So there has to be a way of opening that door, and again in looking at the usul that the Prophet's providing to Mu'adh ibn Jabal, right, where he says, innaka ta'ti ila qawm min ahl kitab, you're going to people from the people of the book. He says tell them la ilaha illallah, and then he says wa in tajawaz, if they accept it, right, tell them inna Allah farada alaykum khamsata salawat fi al-ghadar wal-layal, tell them about the 5 prayers, and if they accept that, then tell them about the zakat, right? And then he says beware of and this is really deep for me, and I've also, a lot of my teachers like, why does he mention those 3 things and said ittaqi du'a al-madlum fala hijab bainahum wa bain Allah, beware of the prayer of the oppressed? Because seldom in our religion, in our zeal, are we using the ahkam of this religion to oppress people?
Wow, that is amazingly profound,
right? Are we actually oppressing people with it, or are we actually trying to be people of taysir, or people of like a ta'sib, right? And it's like that story of when the Prophet said, "Hasub ar-rajul mimman kana qablakum," a person was taken to come before you, and they didn't find anything. They didn't find anything good in khayrun min shay, anything from good from him. And he said, "Illa kana yukhalita ala nasi," and except that he was forgiving, like he was easy on people. Wa yukhalita ala al-mu'sar, and he was difficult on the one that was going through difficulty. And then he says, "Wa kana amara ghilman," he ordered his servants an yatajawazu al-mu'sar, to forgive and pardon the one that was going through difficulty. And then Allah says, فَقَالَ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ نَحْنُ أَحَقَّ مِنْ رَجُلٍ كَذَلِكَ فَتَجَاوَزْ عَنْهُ. We have more of a right on somebody like this to forgive him for anything that he's done, right? So like there is this beauty in just being like, and there's so many instances in the hadith where one of the companions prayed in the state of janaba, right? And one of the companions snitched on him. Ya Rasulullah, such and such played. It was like, bro, what's your problem? Why'd you snitch on your boy?
فتان أنت يا معاذ. أنه تصلي بالناس وأنت جنوب.
And then he said, he explains. He said, كانت ليلة باردة. It was a cold night. وشفقت. He says, وشفقت لنفسي. I was empathetic towards myself.
And he says, and Allah says, ولا تقتلوا أنفسكم إن الله كان بكم رحيما.
Right? And then the hadith says, look at the beauty of this. The hadith ends with فضحك رسول الله. He laughed at himself, and he just walked away. And like, what are you gonna do now, bro? It's over. I'm saying that you already free. So what are you gonna do? Right? Like, and people can look at that. Look, and again, people can look at that and say like, oh, there's just some weird like progressive thing. Or some people, I think the other side be like, but you guys are talking about janaba and this, like, you guys are way too conservative. It's like, no, I think there's the attempt of like, I'm trying to I'm trying to that we try to bring back the Allah-centric worldview, where this is not about turning this religiosity into a taghut, this thing that faces God. It's attempting to say like, listen, guys, like people don't realize, and I don't want to sound extreme or over dramatic here, is like this is sort of the first time we've seen the concept of God at stake, right? We've never experienced this before. Like the very concept of God is sort of up. Like people, whether people are good or evil, everybody believed in God at some point, right? And especially in the before the 19th in the 20th century, right? But now you're seeing like the rising of like people are going straight for the guttural when it comes to God at some point. And I think we just there's an idea of like
that's amazingly
yeah.
said, subhanallah. I mean, that is very wow. I mean, it is true. We are in unprecedented times like that, conceptually. This whole angle that you're saying, this is all really really reflecting, mirroring the whole concept of maqasid, objectives, which once again, like you mentioned earlier on, with the with the kind of thawabit wal mutaghayyirat, what Imam Shatibi has massively said in his muwafaqat, which you're very fond of. What I know you've been very keen on that book, and you've been kind of studying it, and
Yeah.
how would you sum up this work of Imam Shatibi? Because you're really like a huge fan of the muwafaqat from what I believe. Is that correct?
It's my favorite book. It's my favorite so far. You know what I'm saying? Maybe I just haven't explored it
Doing it,
much.
people. I've got 2 copies over there. Doing it.
So mind you, مسكين مبتدئ في دروس يعني. So like I'm at the beginning stages. So no, I'm still a young boy.
No.
So maybe 10 years from now, maybe it'll be something.
But
Else.
what have you how would you summarize this book, and what do you feel is its position within Islam?
I think what I like about this book is that it gives you a framework of its own, and it's attempting to equip you with understanding usul, these legal functions of law, as opposed to being submissive to the law itself, right? That you realize that the law itself is an attempt for you to reconcile your relationship with your Creator and articulate your faith in with the cards that you've been dealt with, right? And there's even a chapter in it where he talks about the expression of religion and the balagha, or the bulugh of religion, the tabligh of it, the reaching out of it in other than Arabic. And is Arabic wajib, right? For somebody to even be in scholarship, etc., right? And there's this attempt of you trying to basically, and I think you mentioned this, is the very creatively giving us sort of these tools of expressing our religiosity in this public, as opposed like we can now argue because of that book, we actually think about things like istihsan. Now, what is the best option in the situation that is most because there are things we don't know about, right? And obviously it keeps the Quran, an-nass al-Quran, as a focal point, and nothing trumps the book, right? The kitab. It's very loyal to for the Quran, but it also gives you concepts like that understand how urf works, right? And it connects, for example, al-urf linguistically to amr bin ma'ruf, right?
And al-urf, for those of you, is convention and customs, and connecting that to the commandments of God.
And I'll give you an example, is that there's Halloween happens in America, right? And there's a big idea like permissibility of Halloween, whatever.
I don't know. Do you know my fatwa on it, by the way? Or you can guess it anyway.
I don't.
Yeah, I said it's fine. It's absolutely
fine. I'm guessing you think it's the kafir and you go to hell if you do. That's what I'm guessing. You probably think that.
You guessed it right.
So I'll give you an example of this. Is like and this is just where I've got to. I'm not saying this is obviously I'm not passing out anything, but one of the things that sort of I learned, and I sort of shared this with my teachers, and was that I don't see it as an issue, because of we have the usul إذا غابت معنا قد غابت حكم. If the meaning is gone, then the hukm is gone, right? Like we don't need to. I.e. aqiqah. Like aqiqah is the best example, right? Like it's not an Islamic tradition like people think
it's not,
right? Or the we do the qurbani after we get and we pray to, like we do after something good, we slaughter an animal, we feed people. Like that's from universally pre-Islamic traditions, right?
And hence Imam Malik didn't differentiate between the boy and the girl. He said that they both, if you're going to sacrifice, you make no distinction. Like the other madhab said, we're going to give 2 if it's a boy, because we should kind of be more happy. And Imam Malik's madhab is that no, like it's just one, whether it's a boy or a girl.
Because the people of Medina never did it, right?
Yeah, and he said that this wasn't, like, he didn't recognize it as an Islamic practice.
Yeah, much.
But yeah, so.
But yeah, you have things like that. But then now you have something else like Thanksgiving, right? Where people, which I'm personally more strict on Thanksgiving, but Muslims are down with it.
Strict on,
Yeah.
as in against or for?
Yeah, a little bit, which is interesting because
Against,
most Muslims will be like, for Halloween's haram. It's like, you know,
Thanksgiving is just for the pilgrims that went to America. They had this celebration because we're not obviously Americans. So we're not too
they had yeah, well, the pilgrims came to America. They had essentially they had a dinner with the Native Americans, and in the morning the Native Americans were all killed, right?
Oh,
So
wow, okay, that's a version I've not come across.
Yeah, so and the reason why it's delicate to me is because I have there are people in our masjid, and there are people who are Muslims that I know, as well as friends that are not Muslim that I know that are Native Americans, and I can see that they are very, very sensitive to that topic because they said and I presented this meaning towards them, right? And they said no, but the ma'na isn't gone. That was if the ma'na, I presented the idea of like, hey, you know, nobody does it for that anymore, and they were like, no, dude, you're wrong because. You know, and I agree with them. I think it's not for us to decide if the meaning is gone. It's for the oppressed to decide if the meaning is gone, right? So in that regard, I'm actually more concerned. And it's very interesting because our mosques do Thanksgiving.
That is very interesting. Yeah, I didn't even realize that it had an association with the genocide. I thought it was just to do with some pilgrims, you know, the early American pilgrims, and then they offered some kind of a meal to kind of be grateful. And I thought it was just that being commemorated. Obviously, we're not in America. So we're not too familiar with the stories,
Yeah. It's a little more. It's deeper for like Native Americans, right?
I see.
So it's usually flipped because people are like, oh, you know, like Halloween. You say like, how could you say for kids? Like, no, dude, there's nobody getting killed on Halloween. Anybody like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's a dude. There's like that, but you're promoting Satan worship. No, bro. No, how is this? By Allah, I don't promote Satan worship. La ilaha illallah.
You devil. You shaitan.
You know I mean, I've never had that. By the way, and by the way, I've never had issues. Nobody's ever come after me, so I don't have the similar experience as you. Like I've never had.
I've outgrown all of that now. They don't come for me anymore, but in the early days, in my youth. I guess, you know, when I think about it now, we must be, you know, sometimes I'm speaking to ulama, let's say young ulama, madrasa graduates. And then it occurs to me that, wow, like actually, whether they like my opinions or hate them, but to these people, I'm from a somewhat of a senior group of people, isn't it? Like by age simply. Like they
you're still like under 40. I mean, are you under 40? I don't know, but
no, I'm 41. So not that I'm not saying whether I feel old, but I'm saying to these people, it occurs to me that I think, oh wow, I never thought of it like that. You see, like to them, I'm from that batch. Obviously, they're like 22 or something. So, yeah, that's really fascinating. You know what? Some people have been putting some comments here. We'll take a few quick, rapid things. I know we've taken up a lot of your time as well, Shaykh. Zeba Khwaja had sent in a comment saying, I use my tongue like a sword to cut, bleed, and weaken a stoned heart of a man with sharp words. How do I renew his spirit and heart with the Quran? That's just such a poetic question. I don't know. I'm gonna hand that over to the dashing young Shaykh over there. How do you renew the spirit and the heart with the Quran? Well,
that was the question. I was like, what is he? I was like, swords.
You take dashing photographs that like we spoke about earlier on. That's the beginning part. It says. Would you like to say some words on that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Bismillah. You know, number one, there's obviously, you know, provided wadifas that are given for us from the prophetic traditions of Surah Rahman, Surah Yasin, Surah Al-Kahf, and things like that. I would say number one, you know, to try to revisit the idea of tadbir in the Quran. أَفَلَا يَتَتَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. So even if it's
contemplate, not about turning someone around.
Yeah, tadbir. Oh man, dude, no, bro. Oh my god, dude, what in the world?
Because the dubur can also mean the butt behind.
I know.
But now, But the
I
Shaykh
didn't
was
know what
speaking
I signed
piously.
up for. I don't know if I know what I signed up for right now. Do you know what I mean? You know, my gloves. But I mean, what am I supposed to say now? But to do like to actually have try to you know have build a really emotional relationship with the book. لا تجعلوا بيوتكم قبور. Don't make your homes like graves. In that even if it's one verse, even if it's the Fatiha, even if it's whatever that you can do to try to keep those recitations, whether it's nightly, and actually think about what you're reciting, and as well as like try to try to get into the habit of reading. Like if you're memorizing, if you're reading something, try to get, like, if you're reading all of Yasin once a night, go through the meaning in English in the language before sleeping once, and actually think about it and read the tafsir and read about what it means, and learn to love learn to love the book, and it's and build a relationship with that, and realize that it's not like
Amazing words. See, now only somebody in such a spiritual mindset could give you that response. If you ask me, I'll just be like, huh? But that is amazing. Very well said. This Zeba has asked another question. Mufti ji, would you start an online Islamic college? Allahu A'lam. Let's see what fate unfolds for us. There was a question here about, did the Prophet introduce the word Allah? By Chaudhry something, I can't see his full name here. Now, no, the Prophet didn't introduce the word Allah. The word Allah was already in usage in Arabic, referring to God. And he's added to that question. Oh, I mean, unless was there something you'd like?
No. I said, could you imagine if nobody knew what Allah meant, and by the end of the relation, like all the Arabs are like, wait, what is he talking? What is the Quran talking about?
Like, it's like La ilaha illallah. And they're like,
what?
They're like, huh?
Like,
they're like, look, just say there's one Allah. They're like, okay, there's one Allah.
Yeah.
But what is Allah?
Manipulative shahada, dude. Just get everybody match shahadas.
Right, so it's just duping everyone into Islam. But somebody said, no, that Chaudhry, you are Mufti. My question is how the people used to read the Quran in early days without vowel marks. How did the people used to read the Quran without vowel marks? Well, and then I'll. Well, I mean, would you like me?
I put this out to you.
Right, sure.
This is
So first of all, in the early days of Islam, there was no Quran like Quran, as in you kind of picked it up and read it like a book. It was an oral tradition. Secondly, when it did start getting documented, like in the time of, let's say with the Uthmanic script proper, that the Uthman kind of codex that we have for the Quran, the Mus'haf al-Uthmani, it didn't have these vowels and things like this, but the people read it how it kind of flowed to them, in a sense like how you read today text message language, and you just know what the other person is saying if they spell that as THT, or they spell, when people abbreviate would you do something, or could you, as just CD or WD, you would just read it as, like if I wrote WD, would you would just know that. So in a similar way they did that, but you're right, if this was part of what you're questioning, it did lead to some differences in how certain words could be read, because both could be read in that way. Like if you said something like, I don't know, like in let's say in Arabic, like yu'lim, ya'lam, yu'allim. Now some of these in that context may, maybe one of them only fits, but in some contexts maybe more than one fits. And hence you get that difference sometimes in the varying recitations. So, okay, any other, let's see, what are some, firing up some questions here. Mufti Sahab, could you please explain, somebody had asked about aqiqah. Had I said that in the Maliki madhab it is the same for boy and girl? And that is correct, yes it is. It's the same for boys and girls in the Maliki madhab. Right, okay, any particular questions for our esteemed guest? Let me just see, there's comments here. Is it true that Hajjaj ibn Yusuf added the vowel marks in the Quran? Well, I mean, it's attributed to Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. Some people have said maybe it wasn't him. It was around that kind of time anyway. But I mean, it's attributed, but it's not like I don't think it was a huge religious. It was more a strategic move because in the time of Hajjaj, the cities like Kufa and Basra, these things were, and some of the other cities as well around there were being heavily populated, and you had a huge influx of non-Arab Muslims into some of these cities, like the city Wasit, for example, as well in Iraq. Now, I know in some cities they actually put a ban on non-Arabs residing there because they said they're going to end up corrupting the whole Arab culture. Now, in order to get around that, what they did was in some cities they imposed the Arabic language that everybody must speak Arabic. In other cities, what they also began to do was roll out a policy in saying if you're not Arab, you must subscribe to an Arab clan, even if you're not. So if let's say I was Persian, I was living there. Now, because this was the policy, I would probably just go with whatever my friends were, or if they happen to be Al-Kalbi, or they happen to be Al-Quda'i, or they happen to be from a particular tribe. Usually it wouldn't be the ruling tribes, by the way, like Umawi or whatever, but it would be some of these others like Ghatfan or some of these other places. They themselves became mawali to those by associating. But the reason I'm mentioning that is that gives you an idea that they were struggling as well to read the Quran, so vowels were placed to kind of facilitate that Arabicization, if you like. But cool, I hope that any interesting questions for our Shaykh? Right, here's one. My question to the Shaykh: does Qarawiyin have the usual Dars-e-Nizami? Do you know the Dars-e-Nizami?
Is that the one they use in the East?
Yeah, in the Indian subcontinent. So they will have, like, let's say, a variety of. I mean, I'm sure the skeletal, the kind of skeleton structure is the same, but they would, let's say, have like obviously fiqh, they will have usul fiqh, they'll have tafsir, they'll have hadith, they'll have different things, and as each stage goes by, the books intensify. Is that how it was pretty much in?
Yeah, there's sort of two, which you go to the classes, and there's a dars with the sheikh, obviously, and they still have the method of the halaqa style for each session, right? For usul bab, and they sort of have a bab al hajj and like bab al bay', like sales, like a chapter on sales, and that's like for this long times. And then you have the second sort of what you do that what you should be you're encouraged to do, or you're supposed to do, is actually go to the teachers individually and go matan by matan. So you should study Ibn Ashir, which is the first book that you sort of go through your freshman year. You do where you also know Sharh Saghir and things like that. Then you go to the Mukhtasar, and obviously up to Khalil, and you should go book to book to book. And then obviously in Mauritania, it's strictly book to book to book to book to book to book, right?
Wow.
It's memorized, it's sticking to it's book to book. But there is when you graduate with Sharia it goes through a lot of these different topics, and obviously your takhassus is on Arabic and Sharia, and
Your
it's not necessarily your specialization.
Right.
When you're going.
This a question I'd like you to get, and then I know we've taken up enough of your time, Sheikh. But I think this is an important question. Just before that, there's a comment that I think aimed at me. Question: were you expecting the Shaykh to be traditional in his views, as he has been in comparison to your views, Mufti Abu Layth? I mean, to be fair, I was expecting Shaykh Umair to be, if that was aimed at me, unless you're speaking at someone else, to be pretty much how you are, Shaykh Umair. I was expecting that hip element, that kind of contemporary understanding, and the connection to traditional learning. Right, the question I wanted to ask, because you definitely are, I'm asked this so often, and I struggle to answer this. One, because I feel in some ways I'm disconnected in my reading, Islamic reading in an English sense, English paradigm. So, and plus my learning to Islam was done such a long time ago. Now what I read about Islam is only on like niche research things which I'm researching and developing, and so it's difficult when people come to me at an kind of like an entrance level or an interest level, and they will say, what do you recommend we should in English be reading because we've become interested in practicing Islam, and what kind of translation of the Quran and what other books would you recommend? And I honestly, like, the English books I read are just they're either not non-Islamic or they are very detailed on, like, so here's a book, for example, by this is by Fred Donner, The Early Islamic Conquest. It's incredibly academic and maybe controversial as well. Now that's not something I'm going to ever, or the book I showed earlier on, Hanbalism from Piety to Power. This is how my English reading is. So I'm at a loss for words. What would you say, Shaykh? Like, I think you'd be a great person.
That's a good question. No, I mean, I'm just getting to my experience with learning in English, going through books in English, because I've also just been in the environment of just like learning the tradition with Arabic texts. I've been away from a while. I mean, the first book that I read ever, and to be honest with you, the first book was which I liked a lot. It was Footsteps of the Prophet, but Dr. Tariq Ramadan. I don't know if you remember that one.
Okay.
Which
what was it called?
First,
Character of the Prophet.
Footsteps of the Prophet.
Okay.
So, that was the first one. I was like in high school when I read that, and I liked it a lot. And I know a lot of people were really moved by that book. And then there was a book in terms of translation of thing. I think the only person I could think of is doing translations of like Islamic books on law is Musa Ferber, Sheikh Musa Ferber, who's based out of the Emirates. I think he was a Hanbali law. That's the only thing I think of on the top of my head.
But I mean, I don't mean like necessarily they're translating, but people might say, now that I'm interested in Islam, I want to read something. What do you recommend I should read? That kind of angle. Yeah.
That's a great question.
Do you recommend the study Quran? You think that's generally great? And
I literally bought it last week, or 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So I mean, I'm going through it. We'll see, inshallah. I mean, so far I like how it has different like tafsir in it.
Would it be helpful for somebody quite at an early stage? They just have an interest in Islam and the Quran, or would it not? Would it be too complicated?
I don't know. For that one, I really like the MS Abdul Halim one. That one is really good. Yeah, that one is good. And Dr. Miraj's book called Revelations, which is a really great book on Sirah, because he's a physician, a doctor, and what he basically did was he learned Sirah, and he realized, like, listen, when I learned Sirah, it's all of these different talks, and they're all over the place.
That's
right.
Called Revelations.
It's called Revelations, right? Okay. And all these books and talks, and they're sort of all over the place. I'm going to bring it down. Or there's like books like, Martin Lings, rahmatullah alayh, who had this beautiful book, but it's very heavy English-wise for a lot of us. And
have you read that? Because I've only read a tiny amount of it. I was asked just on this Monday night, what's my opinion on it? I said, look, I'm going to be honest, I have got it here somewhere. I said I did start reading it ages ago, and I never really read it.
Yeah.
And I've heard great things about it, but I can't give you my personal. Have you read it? Would you?
It's awesome, but it's heavy. It's heavy. The level of like it is a little heavier. It's a little more like you have to read it as a document more than a. The cool thing about Dr. Miraj's, I think, is it's he writes it like a book with visuals in it.
Oh,
so
right.
it opens things up. Good. It's very easy to memorize.
It's not like very, like some of these sirahs are a bit vicious, and it's like somebody contacted me yesterday saying, look, I was an American contacted me saying, look, I was doing some university research. I had to submit a thesis on marriage in Islam, and the only books I could find, I think she managed to submit something, but she was saying it had like ridiculous kind of like so outdated statements and things like if they had a story about a man who, I think she said, stabbed stabbed his wife in the eye so many times, like 15 times or something, because she said something insulting to him or something like this. And just going on, I mean, the main point being that the books were so in a state of disconnect with our day and age. Is this miracle? Is it something that Revelations? Is it something?
No. It's user friendly. It's very interactive.
Okay, that's
amazing. And it's a very good tool for teachers that are also teaching to learn in terms of teaching method, right? Because it's very good, mashallah. I mean, Allah reward him. He's done an awesome job with it. And there's a lot of people. There's things that are happening now as we speak,
Yeah.
right? There's things. I mean, I know Sheikh Dr. Umar Farooq Abdullah.
Yes.
He's produced now. He's having his new book that's coming up in theology, I believe,
What's
that will
that
come out
on
soon.
theology? Is it? You
On
know,
theology.
Imam Sahib Webb has a book, doesn't he? I don't. Have you
Yeah,
been
yeah,
through?
yeah. I haven't read it. But I heard
It's a
it's
basic level, isn't it?
interesting.
Essentials and things like that, I believe.
Yeah, it's basically I think it's I mean I think it's like traditional books that are translated in a way that is accessible to people. It's mainly the issue is always language. That's the
Yeah.
biggest issue, is the accessibility of language.
Mhm.
So there are certain things out there. I really obviously there was a great book that I liked recently called Hearts Turn by Michael Sugich, which was
Oh, I met
beautiful. This
him.
guy's
I came here a good few years
yeah
back, and amazing
yeah it's a
person.
good
We did a little kind of
yeah.
like a book reading with him as well, at an event in Birmingham.
Really cool stories in there, right? It's just really inspirational, very nice stories, learning stories from. And
What's that one called? Hearts that?
Hearts Turn, Hearts
Hearts
Turn.
turn. Hearts turn.
مقلب القلوب. Yeah, Hearts
Hmm.
Turn.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean things like that. But we need to do a better job with the English stuff though. So we need
I
to
mean,
do
I'm
that.
sure there is a lot out there as well. It's just I feel sometimes I'm, people ask me, and I'm kind of handicapped in answering them because it's like you get so much into something that you're at a different kind of place to other people, and you can't sometimes, like, anything you can refer to is meaningless for them, and what
Yeah,
they
yeah,
want, that's, you're so far away from that stage now, and you don't know what's available. So I love asking other people who are perhaps
yeah,
more
yeah.
in tune with that. Sheikh, right?
I appreciate you. Thank you.
You know what? This has been awesome. I've really
You've been great,
love your
mashallah.
company. People, those of you that want to get in touch with the Sheikh, and I encourage you to, especially those of you in Chicago, Chi-Town, or America. This, I'm telling you, this is a rising legend in front of you. Right? So Sheikh Umair Haseeb on Facebook as Umair Haseeb.
Yeah, yeah.
I have tagged him into my post earlier on today, so if you're looking for his profile, you can find it there. You're not on Instagram or anything like that.
I'm more active on Instagram. So
You are more active on Instagram. Acha, you never told me that.
Yeah, I'm more active.
Naughty.
Come on.
So, okay, what's the same thing? Umair Haseeb, or
Umair _ Haseeb.
or is it just or is Instagram just for the women folk? Is it?
No, man, I know women. Why? There's no such thing.
When I said, Sheikh, where shall I contact? He's like, I'm on Facebook, which has like 3 posts on it, and all his on Instagram he's like really lively, but that's just for, I don't accept friend requests. I'm not honest.
No, listen, man.
Right.
But
So
I appreciate.
but it's
Inshallah.
been
I appreciate
awesome.
you.
So I
Thanks, man.
do
It's real.
seriously reach out to the Sheikh, and anybody, sometimes I get questions about people wanting to study in Morocco. I would say, once again, I will definitely love to forward people to contact you if that's okay with you,
That's fine.
Sheikh Umair, because I think you'd be a huge wealth of experience and knowledge for that. People, right, take very good care of yourselves. If you haven't already liked and subscribed to my channel, then God damn you, what what are you waiting for? And likewise, attend, Sheikh, are your online classes public, are they? Or not?
No,
No,
they're not.
Okay.
Because we're already in the book, so.
Okay, alright, no, so in that case, you're too late, people, you've missed the ship. But anyway, take very good care of yourselves. Right, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. You're doing it, man. That it was awesome, man. Honestly, I really enjoyed. I think it was, and I think a lot of the people definitely were enjoying. I mean, it was, for them. I could see some of the comments. I wasn't, so it didn't disrupt our flow of conversation.